In Wuhan, the lockdown was 72 days, and we must be getting pretty close to that now. The rhododendron season is more or less over, so I thought I'd take you through a few other interesting trees that are flowering in the garden now, so that you too can see them. And the first of these is Crataegus laevigata Paul's Scarlet, which is a double-flowered form of the hawthorn, which occurred as a naturally occurring sport and was first grown in 1868 and received a very early RHS Award of Merit in the 1860s. I don't know why this plant isn't grown more often, because it doesn't really have any prickles, and let's look at the flowers. They open a very dark scarlet, and the flowers are all double, and as they open they get a bit more white in the center. But if you look at the number of flowers on this small tree, it's really incredible, and it's really standing out today. As a tree, unfortunately, it's blown over not once, not twice, but 3 times. The last time about a month ago, when we had those very strong east winds. And so we've had to prop it up again and again, but surprisingly its roots have held, and although despite it falling over, it's still looking absolutely fine. I'll just finish this off by letting Carl zoom in on some of the flower buds that haven't perhaps quite opened, so you can see them in a bit more detail. And this is another hawthorn, Crataegus laevigata Crimson Cloud. And this is a single flower, unlike the Paul's Scarlet which we saw. And the flowers appear in large clusters, and they have this lovely white center. So you get a contrast between the crimson and the white. And if you look at the flower, 1 or 2 flowers here that have just opened, you get an even stronger crimson color, which does fade a little bit. But when we look at the hawthorn in our hedgerows, which is out now or just going over now, we tend to forget what wonderful garden plants hawthorns, or the improved forms of hawthorns, can actually make. Again, this plant is not very widely grown in the UK, although people who see it want to grow it too, and you can well understand that. But it was actually bred in this country in 1828, so it's been around quite a long time. And as you can see, we've taken the precautions with this one blowing over, and we've got it well strapped in. And particularly today, we've got a fair old wind blowing off the sea, and I'm delighted to see that there's a post in place to hold this where it should be. Our third choice for something different to look at today is a very peculiar plant which I suspect very few garden visitors have ever noticed or seen, because it's tucked away. This is Symplocos paniculata. Bit of a mouthful. It comes from China, Korea and Japan, and it flowers in May or June, and it's flowering particularly well this year. But the key thing about this unusual plant from this unusual genus is that in the autumn it produces absolutely ultramarine blue berries, which are just as clustered on the tree as the flowers, fluffy white flowers you see now. And this is actually a record-sized tree in the UK. It's probably, I don't know, about 20 feet tall. But when you look, actually, these Symplocos were planted in a group of 4 or 5. And the reason for that is that you need to have male and female plants, and not all of this clump produces berries, and if you don't grow them together in one group, they won't fertilize each other. So if you are ever tempted to buy this peculiar plant, which is well worth its place in the garden, you probably need to buy 2 or 3 and grow them in a clump to be certain that you can get the blueberries, which is absolutely the finest feature, although one has to say the flowers aren't at all bad either. If we're still stuck in lockdown in another week's time, I'll probably be showing you quite a few more of these. This is Cornus kousa Doubloon, and there are two main sorts of cornuses, Cornus kousa and Cornus florida. This is Cornus kousa is Chinese and Japanese, and what you're looking at aren't actually flowers. These are simply bracts which surround the tiny flower. And the tiny flower is actually already over, and the bract will develop further than this. The name Doubloon is a bit of a puzzle when you look at the flowers relatively undeveloped like this as they are now, but these bracts do double back on themselves when they're mature. They're still a bit creamy and a bit greeny today, and they will go pure white, and they'll get bigger and they'll double back on themselves. I've seen more flowers than this on the tree. This was planted in 2005, and it's made good headway. It hasn't as yet produced much fruit in the autumn, but looking at the way these central bits of the flower are swelling, I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't get some good fruit later on. Probably the early June is quite time enough for most cornuses to be flowering, but this has been a very early year, and I wouldn't normally have expected to see any Cornus kousa flowering at the end of May. Anyway, we've had a bit of a ramble through 3 very different genus of plants. Those of you who belong to come and look at the magnolias early in the season should remember that it's well worth coming back to the gardens in late May and early June, because there's a whole wealth of new things which you may not have seen before to come and enjoy.